Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to come to join with you, bless you, tonight. In fact, let's have a bless you for everyone's going to sneeze. Bless you, bless you. So we have the evening to spend together to talk about adolescence as individuals and adolescence as a period of time of our growth. So let me just check out with you. How many of you once were adolescents? Let me just see. Raise your hand if only half the people are raising their hand. That's interesting. Now, last night I spoke at another set of schools, and we had a number of adolescents here. I don't know if we have adolescents. Do we have any students here tonight? Okay, we have. Raise your hand really high if you're here. Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome. Let's hear it for adolescents. So I will be making these remarks about the adolescent period, but as you can see, all of us once were or still are adolescents. Although maybe do we have anyone younger than adolescents here? Yes, good. How old are you? You're 8. Okay, cool. Well, when adolescence begins, you'll be a little bit older than 8. So you can just listen up for what's going to happen in the future. So here's the interesting thing. What animals, besides human beings, have an adolescent period? Does anyone know? Elephants, dogs, exactly. Actually, most mammals do. So it's not just something we invented here in California to just keep us kind of puzzled or something. It's actually an important period of mammalian development. And so I want you to think about, why would we have a period of time that's distinct from childhood? We have an 8-year-old here. So it's distinct from being 8, and it's distinct from being 38. We have a period of time that's roughly about the second dozen years of life, more or less. So it's not just the same as the teenage years. That is a special period of time that is different from childhood and different from adulthood. So the simplest way of defining this period of time is it's the period of development between childhood dependency. Like, do you depend on your mom? Is that your mom next to you? Or did you come on your own? That's your mom? Great. So would you say that you depend on your mom for stuff like getting you here or taking you to school, things like that? Yeah, and that's pretty natural. When we're kids, we depend on our parents, right? And that's great, right? So in childhood, we're very dependent, and in adulthood, we have a lot of responsibilities, don't we? And so adolescence is that transition between childhood dependency and adult responsibility. And in the old days, it started around, about 200 years ago, it started around in human beings, around 15 or 16 years of age for females, a little bit older for males, and then it ended around 18 or 19. So it was a very short adolescent period we used to have. And now it goes on from about 12 or so to about the mid-40s, right? So it goes on. So it goes on and on. And so we have a couple beliefs about this period of life. And I'm going to start with the myths. So if you're taking notes, these are the things that are wrong, but you hear them all around this planet. The adolescent period, people say, is caused by raging hormones. Exactly. And I have interviewed many endocrinologists and said, is there anything called a raging hormone? And the answer is no. There's no such thing as hormones, which are chemicals in your body which influence how the body functions, that have anger management problems. They just don't exist like that. But everyone around this world says the phrase raging hormones. So the first myth is raging hormones. Now, you may say, well, if it's not raging hormones, what is it? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, if you're an adolescent in the room, I want to say to you that these myths are very disempowering. And I want you to think about it. If someone says to you, and for our 8-year-old, and I've been with like parents of 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds, and they said, oh, I'm so nervous. My 8-year-old is going to become an adolescent, and he's going to be taken over by raging hormones. And the 8-year-old will look at me like, oh my God, right? So if you believe the changes in what you are these raging hormones, what can you do about that? Nothing, right? Nothing. So luckily it's a lie. But it's a disempowering lie, because if you believe it, you will believe there's nothing you can do about your adolescent period. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that people will say things like, your teenager is crazy, or your adolescence is nuts, or, what are the other insulting things people say about adolescents? What's that? They're out of control. What else? Lazy, crazy, out of control, exactly. All these things that are said, they're really kind of nasty. And even if you read some of the books written for parents of adolescents, if I were an adolescent reading those books, I would feel incredibly insulted. And they're actually filled with a lot of lies also. So what happened to me, I'm trained as a scientist. I study the way parents interact with children and how that affects healthy development, called attachment research. And I'm also trained as a physician and initially pediatrician and then a psychiatrist and then a child and adolescent psychiatrist. So as a clinician, what I found was that these statements that were commonly stated were really serious violations to what was scientifically accurate. And then as a parent, because I have two kids, one is 22, the other is 27, a daughter and a son, and they were going through their adolescent period, and what our friends who also had adolescents were saying, and what our pediatrician even said, were plain out wrong. And as our kids went through their teen years and their later adolescence, because adolescence goes into the mid to late 20s, it really struck me that someone ought to clarify for adolescents themselves and their parents what the truths were. So, adolescents are not lazy, crazy, and all those other insulting things. The third myth that is said is that adolescence is such a terrible period of time, you ought to get through it as fast as possible. And if you're lucky, you'll make it out alive and not with a jail record. That's actually what the head of nursing at some major university told me. When my kids were not adolescents, she said, if they make it out alive and don't get in jail, that'll be the best. And, I understood she had a difficult time, but here's the issue, that these views of the adolescent period, like you're supposed to get through it, are actually exactly the opposite of what science shows, as you'll soon see. That there's something very important about the adolescent period of life that isn't only important for adolescents, but it's important for us as adults, believe it or not, to actually hold on to the essential features of adolescence. And there's certain incredible potentials of adolescence that our society, our schools, and our families are actually not supporting. It's a huge human resource that is being wasted by the present setup we have. And so this is actually pretty serious for you who have adolescents yourself, or that is, your children are now in that period of time, or if you're an adolescent yourself, to really gain a perspective about what this is all about. So we're going to talk about that essence of adolescence in just a moment. The fourth and final myth we'll just address here is that third myth was get over adolescence as soon as possible. It's actually just the opposite. Hold on to your adolescence, and you'll actually have a healthier brain, as you'll see. Okay, the fourth myth is that, adolescents have to push away from all adults. And while it is true that it is a natural process across all cultures, when you study it, for adolescents to push against the adults that gave birth to them and raised them, adolescents in all societies need other adults that they can turn to for guidance who are not their birth parents. But we have this setup in our society that doesn't happen naturally. We don't have mentorship by trustworthy adults that we can have, and teachers are very busy in schools, so teachers have a hard time because of the number of kids under their care providing that kind of mentorship, understandably. So where does an adolescent turn for that kind of guidance? It's just a question to keep in mind. Okay, so let's go through what the essence of adolescence is, but before we do this, I want to just share with you a very short story, which is basically asking the question, why do we even have an adolescent period? So to describe this to you, I'm going to have you picture being not 8, but being 4 years of age. And just imagine this scene. You've had a really wonderful sleep. The sunlight begins to peek through your closed blinds, and your mother comes into your room and opens up the door and comes to you, gives you a kiss on the forehead, and says, "Good morning, darling. It's time to get up and go to preschool." So you yawn, and you go, "Mom, thank you. Thanks for getting me up." And your mom says, "What would you like for breakfast?" And you go, "I think I'll have some oatmeal." So your mom calls down to your dad, "She'd like some oatmeal this morning." So your dad starts cooking the oatmeal, and you get out of bed, you go to the bathroom, you wash your face, you take off your PJs, you get on your clothes for preschool, you go downstairs. Your dad's made this oatmeal with, of course, walnuts and blueberries, and you're eating your oatmeal. And you have time for a cartoon, your favorite cartoon, before you go to school. Your dad then drives you to preschool, you get out, you play with some blocks, you go down the slide, you're goofing around with the other kids, you're doing finger painting, you take a little rest, you have a snack, you're hearing some stories, you're doing some fun games, and then your dad picks you up, takes you home for lunch. You then play with your dog, you watch some cartoons, you go take a nap, your dad wakes you up, you dance around with some music with him, your mom comes home from work, and then they all make dinner, you eat your dinner, you watch another cartoon, then you're getting tired, you get in the bathtub, they scrub you down, you brush your teeth, you get in bed, they massage you, sing you a song, and read you a story, and you fall off to sleep. Sounds pretty good, huh? Now, not every kid has that experience, but I just want you to imagine that actually most do. And even a lot of spouses try to get that back. So the adolescents are going, "What? Why would they do that?" Yes. So, now picture this. Nature needs a child whose basically first dozen years of life is all about absorbing the world as it is. Nature needs to do something to this child's brain, because for this child to make it in the world, they've got to leave the oatmeal house. You can't have a child just hanging with genetically related people called your parents. You got to get out and mix it up for all sorts of reasons. And so how is nature going to take this 4-year-old and 5-year-old, 6-year-old? What is nature going to do to this child's brain to get this child to not want to be in that oatmeal house situation? So that's what I want you to think about. If you were nature and designing a genetically programmed change that would exist in all adolescents, and we'll talk about human adolescents now, to get them to get out of the house, the den, the cave, what would you do? So to understand this, we're going to review what research has shown. So in general, the way the brain works, because we're going to look now at the brain a lot, is the brain works by, and I'm going to give you a very condensed summary of developmental neuroscience, but here's how it goes. I don't want to shock anybody, but you start out as a sperm and an egg. I hope they teach you that at Gun and Pallet. So you start out as a sperm and an egg, and the amazing thing, just to get to the point of the brain, is the two-part genetic information get together to make a whole, which is a very interesting thing. And then what happens is the outer layer of this growing set of cells becomes such that it starts to push inward. So the outer layer is going to become the skin. It's called the ectoderm. It pushes inward. So if you go like this with your hands and put your fingernails, try this out, and then push your fingernails into the middle like that till your second knuckles kiss each other like that. See where your fingernails arrive in the middle? That's going to become the neural tube. So the reason I tell you this is because the nervous system, comprised of neurons, is basically made up of very sophisticated skin cells. That's what a neuron is. And what is the role of the skin? It's the interface of the outside world and the inside world. So The brain is exactly like that. Even though it's inside the body and encased by the skull, with the brain reaching out to all parts of the body, the fact is the nervous system is always about the interface of the outer and the inner. So that's just the beginning of where we're going. Now, two things are going to shape how this nervous system develops. One is genetics and what regulates the genes, called epigenetic controls. We won't get into that now, but basically we've learned that the way neurons find each other and connect up is driven by your genetic inheritance. And the second thing is experience. So I knew that the brain responds to experience even in the womb. So with my two kids, I did an experiment where I would sing them a song through my wife's womb, and then when they came out, I had a neutral party come and watch, and I would sing 4 different songs, and I asked, one was a her and one was a him, I asked the neutral parties to guess which song was that child's song in the womb, and they could tell each time. Anyway, now my kids don't let me sing at all, so I'm not saying you should do this experiment, not even in the shower, so this is a bit of a problem. Anyway, but you can show that even at about 7 months of gestation, the ears are working, and you can show that you can learn in the womb. Very interesting issue. So then what happens is, you get this baby coming out of the womb, and genes continue to determine how the neurons connect with each other, and then experience, like what happens between a parent and a child, begin to shape how the brain is structured. So you can show that if you are not a particularly caring parent and do particularly outrageous things, like neglecting your child or abusing your child, you can show that the brain will be affected in some pretty negative ways, and the child will feel pretty badly about who he or she is. You can create a state of shame in your child in the first years of life by how you treat that child. Shame is an emotion that feels really heavy in the body. It's like heavy in the chest. It's a nauseous feeling in the belly. And it has a belief that goes along with it. I am defective. And it's a feeling very different from guilt. Guilt is, I've done something wrong, and next time I do that thing, I'll do it better. But if you have a feeling of shame, there's something defective about me, what can you do about that? Nothing. So shame is coupled not only with this heavy feeling like I'm a defective person, but I'm helpless to do something about it. Okay? And we know that experiences can create the emotion of shame, the belief I'm defective, and the sensation of helplessness. And these are experientially created things that we just know. So the child is growing up and learning all these things about, let's talk about really secure attachment, learning I'm a good person, who I am is fine, I feel joyful about being alive, I love connecting with other people, I have a need, I can reach out to other people, communicate my need, that's called secure attachment. And secure attachment is based on 4 S's. And they're worth memorizing because it's true not just parent-child relationships, it's true in any relationship. Number 1, the first S, is you need to be seen. Seen means not just your body is observed. Seen means the mind beneath behavior is recognized. That is, if I'm crying, my mom doesn't just say, "Stop your crying, Danny," because she saw I was crying. She says, "What are you feeling? What's the mind beneath behavior?" Mind meaning your subjective experience. What are your feelings? What are your thoughts? What's the meaning of that just happened that's creating these tears? So you can call that mind sight. That mother, my mother, sees the mind beneath my behavior, and with that mind sight skill she has, I have the experience of feeling felt. That my inner life is sensed by her. And it gives me this feeling of wholeness. It gives me this feeling of connection with her. That's the first S. Seen. The mind that I have is seen by the caregiver who's taking care of me. Does that make sense? Okay. The second S is soothed. S-O-O-T-H-E-D. Soothe. It means when I'm distressed, my mother or my father, my caregiver, is going to sense my distress and make an action to reduce my distress. So if I'm hungry, she may feed me. If I'm cold, she may put a blanket around me. If I'm too hot, she takes the blanket off. If I'm tired, she puts me in the crib for a nap. If I'm lonely, she hangs out with me. All these kinds of things of being soothed when I'm distressed. And what that teaches me too is that what I feel is worthy of being known by somebody else and leads to a behavior that actually makes me feel better. Does that make sense? So soothe is what I'm learning in my first months of life, even first years of life. So that's S number 2, so seen and soothe. The third S is I am safe. And that has 2 parts to it. One is I am not put in harm's way by my parents, so my parent protects me, and I feel a sense of really safety with my parent. But the other is that my parent doesn't terrify me, and if she or he does, she makes a repair of that rupture in the safety that I expect to have. Right? We've already blessed you, and now we'll bless you again. So, being safe. And this is why I put in books like Parenting from the Inside Out or Mindsight, times when I frighten my kids, and my kids say, why do you put that? You look like such a jerk. And I say, look, many parents do this. The issue is making a repair. So if you're listening to this as a parent, you go, oh my God, I've terrified my kids many times. It's never too late to make a repair. Go back and make a reconnection with your child, with your spouse, whoever it is, and own up to that. Because that is what creates security. So, safety is being protected from harm, and if your parent ever terrorizes you, they make a repair and they try to reduce the intensity or the frequency or at all, try to reduce times when they terrify. And those 3 S's, being seen, being soothed, being safe, give you security, the 4th S. Okay, so what we know is that if you've had the good fortune of having that kind of experiences, those kind of experiences, you actually can feel pretty good about who you are, and as you start going to be in preschool, 3, 4, 5, you start reaching out, and you have a certain way of regulating your own internal state called self-regulation. You can actually start doing things with other kids. Research has been now going on for about 40 years, where these kids are in their actually mid-40s now, where they've studied them across their whole lifespan. And you can show this is the work of Alan Strofe in the Minnesota study and his colleagues, which basically show that these early experiences shape you, but changing relationship experiences continue to change this way that you feel about yourself. So we're always in a process of emerging. It's never over. And if you had a really rough time in your early years, you can always repair it to become what I call more integrated. Because in the brain, these 4 S's create integration in the brain, which helps you feel good about yourself, feel connected to other people, and allows you to have what's called resilience. That's what integration in the brain creates. Okay, so the brain is accumulating more and more connections, becoming more and more integrated, and then you're 8, like our 8-year-old, you're 9, you're 10, you're 11. Then something happened that was only discovered like about a dozen years ago or so, or maybe a few more now, 15 years ago, which kind of surprised people. Instead of the brain continuing just to make new connections, which it was doing all this first dozen years of life, driven by both genes and experience. And you may say, well, hold on. How does experience change the connections in the brain? You basically drive energy through connections among the neurons. So it goes very simply, where attention goes, and attention is a process that directs energy and information flow. Where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. It's very simple. Where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. And as you'll see soon, this is how the culture of a society, or the culture of a school, or the culture of a family can immerse a child in a way that attention is directed in certain ways. For example, like on the destination of get a certain GPA, get a certain grade point average thing done or get a certain standardized test or get a certain elite school or something like that. That's a lot of attention going to my worth is dependent on me getting a certain number. It's a very externally directed set of criteria about what success means. So that's all about how you're shaping the brain of that child. And it's shaped by our larger culture, school culture, classroom culture, family culture. So we're going to look at that in just a few moments. So the brain is being like a sponge soaking all this in, but then around 11, 12, 13, not exactly corresponding with puberty, which is, the maturation sexually of the ovaries and sexual characteristics for a female, and the male, the testicles and sexual development there. It's not exactly the same, so you can have early puberty and a child is not in adolescence, and you can have delayed puberty where adolescence has begun before puberty. So it's not the same. Adolescence and puberty, their onset is not the same, but they're roughly the same in terms of timing. What adolescence is marked by is something that kind of shocked people. You have a very significant moment now where you begin what's called the pruning process. You start to remove synaptic connections that existed in an 8-year-old, now for the 14-year-old are starting to be carved down. Wow. Why would I do this? When I teach in middle schools and high schools, the kids often go, oh my God, that's kind of freaky. I don't want to be pruning my brain. Stop it! And then they start singing the Peter Pan song, Never, Never Land, and because they don't want to grow up. But this is the issue. Growing up means you start specializing your circuitry. This is the power of pruning. It's like if you're growing a garden, right? You put the plants in, they grow all over the place. Well, for that garden to really function well, what do you have to do? You got to prune it. Right? So when you do studies like of how an 8-year-old functions in a scanner and you give them a problem-solving thing, the whole brain is doing a lot of different things, a lot of energy is being used, and they solve the problem, but it's using like everything. You put a 14-year-old in there, they very selectively pick out very specialized circuits that solve the problem very efficiently. It's a big difference between 8 and 14 because the pruning process has begun. So in brain development, we talk about two things: differentiation, things being made different or specialized, and the pruning process is a necessary part of the specialization of the brain. The second thing is linkage, how you connect the now differentiated circuits. And in fact, in the second half of adolescence, so like mid to late teenage years, and then way into the mid to late 20s, you're having myelin formation. Myelin, M-Y-E-L-I-N, it's a healthy sheath that is laid over connected neurons. It allows them essentially to communicate 3,000 times more effectively. It's 100 times faster the speed of conduction, 30 times shorter the resting period between firings. So that's 30 times 100, that's 3,000. So that's where you get, it's not just faster, it's more coordinated and balanced with myelin. Myelin is the linkage, pruning is the differentiation. So this process of pruning and myelination is called brain remodeling. So if you had to say what's going on with adolescence, it's completely accurate to say adolescence is a period of brain remodeling. It's a construction site, which is a beautiful thing for reasons you'll see in a moment. Okay, so there are a couple of other things that are going on, but to really understand them, I want to thank the principals of Gunn and Pali high schools for coming in early today. They came in themselves with the help of the PTSA, and they taped a model of the brain under your chairs for you to actually take home as a handout. So if you reach under your chair and see if you can feel that right there, and then pull out your arm, you'll see attached to your arm is a hand. Did everybody find your handout for today? Okay, good. Let me just check with our principals. May they take these things home with them? Yes, very good. Okay, so take your hand, fold your thumb into the middle, and then fold your fingers over the top. And this brain would be oriented like this in your head. And we're going to review these parts because to really understand adolescent brain remodeling, you need to understand the brain in general. So let's review the parts. Okay, this is up in your, up in your head. So the spinal cord, as well as the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, bring in all the information and energy up from the body, up through the neck, and that's represented in your wrist right here. So we'll just call that the spinal cord, your wrist. Now, if you lift open the top of your brain, which is the cortex, and then lift open the middle, which is your limbic area, the thumb, you'll see the palm area. This palm area is the brain stem. Okay? It is a 300 million year old part of the brain. So it existed in reptiles, we call it the old reptilian brain. And the two big processes it's responsible for are one, it helps regulate thirst and eating and respiratory things and heart rate and stuff like that. So basic bodily functions. And the second thing it does is it's responsible for the reactive states of fight, flight, freeze, or faint. So when you are threatened, you literally in your brainstem activate, should I fight back? Should I flee? Should I tighten up my muscles and freeze? Or am I so helpless that I just collapse in a faint? Those 4 F's. And I say this to you because these reactive states are the basis of basically stress. When we talked about stressed out people or stressed out adolescents or stressed out, I was teaching at Stanford at the medical school last year, and the dean introduced me and said, Cindy, I don't know if you know this, but said, we had a surgeon invite this psychiatrist here. And, I don't know if you know this, but the internist who was introducing me, they don't like psychiatrists, just so you know. And I thought that was the stupidest thing in the world. And I'm going, oh my God, what a way to begin the day with these people. And he goes, but this morning on my desk was the Mayo Clinic report. And let me show you why Dr. Welton did a brilliant thing bringing a psychiatrist here. And he reads the reports, the saddest thing in the world. 2011 Mayo Clinic report shows that residents in training in hospitals, 46% or so, are burnt out, many of them considering suicide. 2014, after they already knew the 2011 result, 56%. And he goes, this is an epidemic. And then we spent the day talking about mind sight, seeing the mind, and what you could do for these residents to reduce their stress, which is what I'm going to talk to you today about in terms of what we do with adolescents these days. Burnout and stress and suicidal thinking is not something limited to the adolescent period. These are residents just across the street at Stanford Hospital and hospitals all around this country. I have been giving lectures this year to the national meetings of the Veterinarians Association. 3,000 veterinarians in one group, 2,000 veterinarians in another group, equine veterinarians and the general veterinarians. They have the highest suicide rate now of any profession. So I had to interview a bunch of veterinarians to figure out why are these veterinarians killing themselves. It's very serious. And even when I had a workshop afterwards with hundreds of veterinarians, not the thousands in the big room, but just a smaller thing, like a room like this size, a number of them took the microphone and were talking about why they were thinking of killing themselves. So I won't get into that here, but all I'm telling you is that stress is a serious thing across the lifespan. And when you feel completely helpless, suicide actually seems like it's a choice you should make that makes you feel empowered. You're getting rid of your pain. My teacher who started the American Suicide Prevention Service, Ed Schneidman, called it psych ache. Achy in the mind. Psyche is a synonym for soul, intellect, spirit, and mind. There's an ache that you only sense with mind sight, seeing the mind of another person. And that's what these physicians are suffering. That's what these veterinarians are suffering. And that's what some of our high school students suffer for reasons that don't have to exist. So the brain is pruning and specializing, it's myelinating and all this stuff. And sadly, increased stress increases pruning. And you can prune too much. And then it makes you hard to regulate your emotions. So we're going to go over how these systems work together. And we're talking about the brainstem now. But let's now go to the next level of the brain, the limbic area, because that's what changes the most. At birth, your brainstem is pretty well formed. The limbic area, let's say, is about halfway formed. And it develops in the first 3 years of life in a big way, but it continues to be molded throughout the lifespan. During adolescence, it changes in a very big way. So I'm going to give you the 5 functions of the limbic area, and we're going to think about how these change in adolescence. And I'm going to actually ask the adolescents in the room. Is it okay if I ask you a question? You and all your colleagues. Adolescents, raise your hand. Let me just see where you guys are. Okay, so many of you are down here. So I may ask you a question, just collective. I'm not going to put any of you on the spot. But just get ready. Calm your brainstem down. You don't need to fight back. You don't need to flee. You don't need to freeze. You don't need to faint. So you can go bring yourself from a reactive state to a receptive state as we go over this. In fact, before we go through the limbic 5 functions, let's do a little exercise where I'm going to teach you what it feels like to be in the reactive threat state, and then what it's like to enter the receptive, responsive state. Okay? So put your notes down if you're taking notes. I'm going to say a word. I'm going to repeat it several times. And then I'm going to pause. Then I'm going to say another word and repeat it several times. Then I'm going to pause, and then we'll do a few more things. Okay, you ready? So all I'm asking you to do is be aware of whatever arises as it arises. It's called mindful awareness, means you don't have to have judgment about it, you don't have to have expectations about it. Just be aware of what happens as it happens. There's a spaciousness of consciousness that allows you to be aware of it, but you may start feeling intense things, and that's fine. Okay, everybody ready? No. 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 Yes. 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 Now I invite you to take a nice deep breath. And now try putting one hand on your chest and one hand on your abdomen. Just put some gentle pressure. And just close your eyes and just see how that feels. And now just reverse it, so the hand on your chest goes to your abdomen, the one on your abdomen goes to your chest. Put some gentle pressure, see how that feels. And now put it in whichever configuration is most comforting for you, left or right on top, whatever works for you. Put some gentle pressure. And now let's just take a moment, just as your hands are like that, just sense your breath wherever you feel it most naturally, your nostrils, air coming in and out. Could be your abdomen moving out and in with the breath, your chest rising and falling. Just sense the breath. Now take a bit of a deeper and more intentional breath. You can let that go and let your eyes come open if they're closed. And if you want, you can leave your hands there or put them down. Let's just do a quick survey. How many felt that putting a hand on your chest and a hand on your abdomen, whichever way, was comforting in some way? Raise your hand really high. Really, really high. Okay, so it's the majority of people. How many felt right on top was the most comforting? Raise your hand really high. And left on top. Okay, so interesting. Okay, so if anyone is interested in getting a doctoral degree, I've now done this with probably 5,000 people, and it's always the same. It's about a quarter left on top, 3/4 right on top. It's usually the majority find it comforting. No one knows why, and you have a built-in control group, so easy to get a PhD. Okay, someone should go and do it, and then call me and let me know what you find. Okay, now let's just do a quick survey. How many people found it was different how you felt when I said no versus when I said yes? Raise your hand if there was a difference. Okay, so I'm going to just go over here and just shout out some words on this side. What did no, we'll start with no. What did no feel like? Just shout out a word, and I'll repeat it. Tight. Scary. What's that? Angry. Hurtful. Rejecting. What's that? Frustrating. Percussive. Restricting. Painful. Dense. Limiting. Shame. Mean. Annoying. Judgmental. Bad. Okay. Wasn't very pleasant. What that likely is doing is it's activating through all sorts of systems, but in part, a threat state. You heard different aspects of fight, flight, freeze, and even faint, which is can be seen as the shame state. I'm helpless to do anything. Now let's go through yes. Just shout out some things with yes. What did yes feel like? Comforting, soothing, accepting, relaxing, empowering, warm, loving. What's that? Open, affirming. What's that? Relief. Joyful. What's that? Calming. And freeing. Okay? So one thing that this exercise teaches us is the brain has two states it gets into. If you're talking the big picture, one is a reactive state that comes with no, and one is a receptive state that comes with yes. So my next parenting book with Tina Bryson is actually called The Yes Brain, because it's how do you parent, it's not just parent, how do you live life really, where you encourage a yes brain state. Because so much of what happens, unfortunately, in school is a no-brain state. I don't mean it's a no-brainer. I mean it's literally creating this reactive state. You know, like I work with one school, people from one school in LA, and the mission there is to get into the top 5 elite colleges. Well, only about maybe 8 or 9% of the kids in that school will get there, and the rest of them are considered failures by the administration of that school, and I know that for a fact. And those kids feel that. That's a no-brain school. Can you imagine? You say 90% of you are going to feel inadequate no matter what you do and a failure. What kind of system does that to people? So that's that's the no-brain state that's created, right? You feel horrible. You can feel it, just even this little exercise. I'm not even your dad saying you can't have ice cream. I'm just saying no harshly, right? But it activates the brainstem that way. Okay, so now the brainstem sits beneath the limbic area. Now we're going to talk about the limbic area because it's the major thing that changes in adolescence. So let's go through the 5 functions of the limbic area. And I want you to think about adolescence. I'm going to ask the adolescents in the room just to reflect on it, and I'm not putting any of you on the spot. You don't have to say things if you don't want to, but if you're inspired, just say, something that relates to it if you want to, okay? So it's not like you have to, it's just an invitation, not an expectation. Is that good? Okay. So you go, smiles, that's good. All right. The first thing is the limbic area, which has regions, you may have heard about the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. The limbic area, your thumb area here, first of all, you'd have a left and right thumb for be a perfect model. Most of us just have one thumb. And I say that because I used to not add that in, and someone said, I saw someone at a gas station who had 2 thumbs, so you really need to respect those people. And I said, you're absolutely right. And 2 meetings later, when I started saying 2 thumbs, I went to a gas station and there was a person with 2 thumbs. I'm serious. So, okay. But anyway, so there's a left and right limbic area and there's a left and right cortex, but the brainstem is just singular. Okay, so number 1, the limbic area, the thumb region, works with the brainstem and the body, meaning your muscles, your heart, your intestines, send all the signals up from the body to the brainstem, to the limbic area to do function number 1, create emotion. So when we say you want to identify the emotion that's going on in a person, you're talking about this way the body is coming up into the brain. And then the limbic area, brainstem, and body are pushing signals up into the cortex where we develop awareness, as you'll see. Many people, not only adolescents, but many adults, don't have much awareness of their internal bodily world or the brainstem world. They don't have what's called self-awareness. And if you don't have self-awareness, you can't calm your interior state because you're literally living above your limbic area, as we'll talk about soon. Most of what happens in schools and even in families teaches you to live up in your cortex and not be aware of stuff that happens in your limbic area, your brainstem, and your body. So we're just going to use the word self-awareness for that. The lack of self-awareness leads to a lack of the ability to calm and soothe one's own emotions. And studies show, for example, when parents teach kids, they say, oh, little Danny, let's say I fall down, I hurt myself, and my mom comes over. She could say, get up. That's one option. She could say, oh my God, you hurt, oh, it's so terrible, I can't believe how terrible it is, oh my God, you fell, boy, that's so horrible. That's another option. Or she could say, bless you, I shouldn't bless you, I should regulate myself. Or she could say, oh, that must have been so scary for you to fall over that tricycle that your brother left there. Let me help you up. That must feel so scary to have that blood coming out of your knee right now, or something like that. Right now, what did she do in that case? She used what's called mental state language. She used words in her linguistic communication, linguistic is language, where she said, Danny, you may have been surprised. Danny, you may be scared. Danny, it may be painful. So in her relationship with me, she's teaching me to be aware that I have an internal state. Number 2, she's teaching me my internal state can be known by someone else. And number 3, she's teaching me to name it, to tame it. That if I can name my internal state, and we did studies at UCLA to prove this, you actually can calm the storms inside. Now, if I were raised by parents who just says, get up, what does that teach me about anything? Nothing. Or if my mother becomes so distressed, she falls down, she's crying, oh, she's aching with her leg, then there's not enough differentiation in that relationship. She's too much like me, and that doesn't give me enough space. So as parents, we need to offer these things called reflective dialogues to teach children about their own emotional state, to give them self-awareness. Okay, so that's number 1. Now, in adolescence, do you feel like your awareness of yourself is changing from when you were 8? This shrugs. Okay. All right. So this is something just to think about, and just think about whether it could be changing. And when we were all adolescents, just remember if that changed at all. Okay. Number 2, the limbic area works with the brainstem to create what's called motivation. It drives our behavior. Motivation is an internal state combined with the limbic area and the brainstem, and there are all sorts of ways. We have a book in our series. I edited a series of books called a series on interpersonal neurobiology, and one of those books is called The Archaeology of Mind, and it reviews these brainstem limbic motivational circuits by Jaak Panksepp, is his name, Jaak Panksepp. Anyway, the bottom line is you have these deep motivational drives that push your behavior, right? Now, we have an 8-year-old here. Would anyone guess that when this 8-year-old is 14, what motivates him will be different from when he's 8? Anybody think that's true? Yeah, because motivation changes in a huge way in adolescence, and teachers need to realize that so they can tune into what actually motivates an adolescent. So that's number 2, motivation. Number 3, evaluation. This limbic area has something called appraisal. Appraisal is where the limbic area is saying, is this thing happening right now important enough for me to allocate attentional resources? So is it important or not? That's step 1. Step 2 of evaluation, after I've appraised it's important, is I say, hey, is this important thing I'm paying attention to? Is it good or is it bad? That's called hedonic tone. That's number 2. Number 3, it says, if it's good, how do I get more of it? And if it's bad, how do I get less of it? That's the appraisal circuit. So let's remember back when we were adolescents, and the adolescents in the room. Would you say that the way you were evaluating things being important or not changed when you're 14 versus when you're 8? Anybody think it changed? No, that's so amazing. Okay, well, I remember it changed in a big way. And this evaluation changing, we'll see in a moment, has something called hyper-rational thinking, which we'll get into soon. Okay, that's number 3. Number 4 is memory. Memory changes a lot. These areas govern factual memory that's laid down. It starts building on what's called autobiographical memory. And so adolescents have a richer kind of sense of who they are and start asking questions about who they are in life. Why are they here? Important existential questions like that. The 5th function is called attachment. And attachment is basically how we are connected to other people, initially our parents and other caregivers, for soothing, for being seen, for being safe, for feeling secure. So, let me ask the adolescents in the room, did you notice a change in your life from when you're 8 to now on who you turn to when you're upset? Shrugs, okay. Anybody want to commit themselves to a response? No. Okay, how about the adults? What change do you remember happening when you're a kid versus when you're an adolescent? Who would you turn to when you're upset? Friends, exactly. And it's interesting. It would be interesting to do a study if maybe adolescents aren't doing that anymore, but that would be actually pretty fascinating. But it's a natural part of adolescence to start turning to friends rather than parents. Now, as a parent, of course, you feel rejected, you think you did something wrong, but it actually means you did something right, because this is the natural state of affairs for turning toward not caregivers, but turning towards friends instead of parents. Okay, so let's do the cortex now. If you put your fingers over the top, this is the last part of the brain develop. Brain develops from back to front, bottom to top. And this part of the brain basically has 6 cell layers, cortical columns they're called, that make maps of things. So in the back you make a map of the 3-dimensional world with your eyes, if you can see. If you're blind, you make it with your fingers. So it's a 3D map-making part of the brain. You got occipital lobe in the back. You take in sound through the ears. That goes to the temporal lobes on the side. You have the parietal lobes here upward on the side that maps out the body in space. And the frontal lobe, the front part of this cortex, is about more abstract things like thinking about the teenage brain, or thinking about who you'd want to vote for in an election, or thinking about the importance of freedom and respect, stuff like that. So, these important issues of morality and compassion and thinking about the future are frontal map-making abilities. So it's a map-making area of the brain. So when this brain is integrated in the cortex, what's interesting is, if you look at your middle 2 fingernails, take a look at that. Let's do a little anatomy lesson here. Look at these middle 2 fingernails. Of course, they're part of the cortex, But if you lift it up, what do you notice it's also connected to? Go ahead, do your anatomy. You didn't know you were going to be dissecting a brain, I know. But let's do your brain dissection here. It's connected also to what? The limbic area, exactly. What else? The brainstem, exactly. You can't tell from your model, but it takes in signals directly from the body itself, and it also takes in signals from the social world. So let's name the 5 sources of energy and information flow that are coordinated and balanced by the area behind your forehead. Some people like to call that the third eye area. Let's just call it the prefrontal cortex. Cortex. Please say it. This gets you more actively learning. Limbic area. Brainstem. Body. Social world. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you 9 functions. Just, you don't have to write them down, but if you want to write them down. And I want you to think about these functions because they're extremely important for talking about resilience in human beings. And if you want a child who then becomes an adolescent in middle school, who then goes toward 12th grade before you launch them out into the world in this country, to have resilience, you want them to have maybe one of these functions, or 2, or 3 maybe. Let's just say we're going to name 9. And these are 9 functions that come from the integrative role of this area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex that connects the cortex, the limbic area, the brainstem, the body, and the social world, coordinates and balances them into one coherent, flowing set of information and energy flow. You ready? Number 1, this area is important for regulating the body. So it actually coordinates the limbic area brainstem's input from the body and balances out what's called the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches of the nervous system. It's like an accelerator and a brake that extends down from the head into the body. You can measure it in all sorts of ways. The ultimate arbiter of it is right here. You can measure stress by someone's inability to balance these 2 branches of the nervous system. You can measure it like that, with heart rate variability coherence monitors like the heart math programs that you can teach people how to do this. So, regulating the body, number 1. Number 2, attuned communication. Attunement is tuning into the internal mental experience of another person, their feelings, their meanings, their thoughts, the significance of things for that person. That's interpersonal attunement. And even internal attunement, which is one way of talking about mindful awareness. Tuning into your internal state. Attuned communication. That's number 2. Number 3 is something in science we call emotional balance. That's where you allow emotions to rise up and really fill your life with passion and vitality. You don't let them become too high where they're chaotic, or too depleted where they're rigid. So there's this optimal flow of emotional balance, like a river of harmony that's bound on one side by chaos, the other side by rigidity. That's called emotional balance. Number 4 is called response flexibility, which means how do you pause before you act on an impulse, consider all the different responses that are possible, and choose the one that's optimal for the situation you're in. Response flexibility, number 4. Number 5 is the ability to soothe fear, and not just be driven to act on your fears. To soothe fear. That's number 5. Number 6 is simply called insight, and the scientific term for it is autonoetic consciousness, self-knowing awareness, which includes a wonderful term from the researcher Endel Tolvin called mental time travel. Where was I in the past? Who am I right now? What's going on right now? And where would I like to go in the future, called prospective thinking. Insight is basically where you make a mind-sight map of me. Where have I been? Me. Where am I now? Me. Where am I going in the future? Me. So mindset map of me. That's number 6. Number 7 is empathy, which is making a mind-sight map of you, right? What's going on inside of you right now? What are you feeling? What's the meaning of this thing for you? What matters to you? What happened to you before that's in your memory system that gives you this perceptual view of what's going on? And your view is different from my view. We have different histories, so I can empathically understand your perspective even if it's different from my view, if your opinion is different from mine, right? That's a mind-sight map of you. That's number 7. Number 8, and amazingly, these are all coordinated by this area of the brain using other regions and linking them together. Number 8 is morality, which is a mind-sight map of we. It's how do we realize we are deeply interconnected with each other? We're not just isolated silos. We have a responsibility to each other and the planet, even when we're alone. That's number 8. And number 9 is intuition. How do you let yourself become aware of the wisdom of the body? Literally, around the intestines you have a neural network, and around the heart you have a neural network, a heart brain and a gut brain. And they send up signals that have important messages for you. Like, don't do that. Don't drive 100 miles an hour, even if your head is telling you to. Your gut says don't do it. I wish the 19-year-old who ran over my favorite teacher and killed him had mindsight lessons to develop his bodily wisdom, so his gut would have told him, don't do it, even though his adolescent brain said, oh, that'll be so great to do, as you'll see in a moment. Even though he crashed the car 2 months earlier, and his parents bought him a new car. So, that's number 9. Now let's just look at that list, and let's ask a couple of questions. First of all, how many of you would like to have these functions in your own personal life? Raise your hand. So that means you want to have an integrated brain, and you want to have a resilient mind that can create these 9 functions. This is how it's created. Now, for an 8-year-old, this may not make sense, but please listen in, okay? Let's talk amongst each other as parents. How many of you as parents have ever had the experience of flipping your lid? Where you lost maybe one of those functions, maybe 2, maybe all 9. Raise your hand if that's happened. Yeah, and in fact, this is what I would write in the books that I would write, flipping my lid. This is where the flipping the lid term comes from, right? You flip your lid because when you are an integrated person, you don't act like that, but when you flip your lid, you're like a different person, aren't you? Right. This is why my kids say, why do you put this in books? You look like a jerk. Because people tend to look like jerks at various times. You haven't slept enough, you haven't eaten, someone pushes a hot button issue with you or whatever. So making a repair means bringing yourself back into an integrated state so you can be more resilient again. Making a repair also means reaching out and reconnecting with the person with whom you flipped your lid. Right? Now, how many of you would like your parents to have these 9 functions? Raise your hand if you like that. Okay, good. How many of you would like your significant other to have these things? How many would you like, I don't know, an elected official to have these things? Right? So these are integrated functions of a resilient mind. And guess what? The principles of Gunn and Pally can do things with your kids in this school to teach them to develop these 9 functions. It isn't a mystery how you get these functions of an integrated brain. So when I wrote the Brainstorm book, it was all about what kind of practices could you do as an adolescent yourself. I wrote the book for adolescents to read, right? Because nothing was available for my kids. They'd already passed through their early teen years. But I said, somebody ought to write a book to adolescents, respecting adolescents, and looking at the essence of what adolescence is, so they could develop these 9 functions. And that's what all the gray pages in that book are. Ways of developing those 9 functions of a resilient mind. These are mind-sight skills that are teachable. Even if you didn't learn them at home, you can learn them at school. Or you can learn them from the book. The most amazing award I ever got was I was teaching at the Aspen Institute. And my wife and I met some friends for breakfast before the talk I was going to give. And I don't eat gluten anymore because of bodily reactions to gluten. Anyway, they were all ordering their gluten-filled food, whatever it is they do. I had to develop empathic joy when people eat these French toasts that look so good. Anyway, so the waitress comes over and says, what would you like? And I said, well, I can't have this, and I can't have that, and I can't have this, but you could modify this and modify that. She goes, we don't modify this restaurant. So I said, well, could you try this? She goes, we don't do that. And she leans over, she goes, but I know who you are, so I'll do it for you. So anyway, she got me this incredible breakfast. But afterwards, she came back. I said, what do you mean you know who I am? She goes, you want me to tell you? I said, yeah, my friends were listening with my wife. She goes, I have a 15-year-old at home. She was probably, 45, 50, a waitress. She said, and he was suicidal. And I looked desperately around what I could get, and I saw you on YouTube, and I watched all your videos, and then I bought the Brainstorm book for him, and it completely changed his life. And that's why I got you that omelet. And to me, that was like literally the best award anyone could ever want as an educator. So let's look at the essence of adolescence, and I want you to think about why nature would create these changes in the brain that we're going to go over now. What's the downside of it, and what's the upside? There's 4 aspects of it to it. Now I have to make a confession. I have a problem. It's a pretty serious problem, actually. I'm an acronym addict. So if you don't like acronyms, I'm very sorry. I have to share one with you, and it's when I was writing the book. When you write books, you want to. What I do as a scientist is I want to look deeply into the science. So I have these 50 textbooks I've edited and stuff like that. That's many of them other people wrote. But I'm writing my own book. I want to take the science and I want to crystallize the essential features of the hardcore science in peer-reviewed journals, and then I want to translate it in a way that's memorable for the reader. So that's what I do. So I said, well, what is the essence of adolescence? And I had read all the research and all the brain stuff and all that kind of stuff. I'd already read it all. I said, now it's time to write. So I said, what's the essence of adolescence? What's the essence of it? I'm sitting there, I'm going, oh my God. The essence of adolescence is the essence. That's the acronym. And I go, whoa, this is awesome. So here it is. Sorry. ES. ES, the first part of essence, is emotional spark. What you see in the adolescent brain is more input from the body, the brainstem, and the limbic area up into the cortex. And so adolescents are more emotional. Literally, if you compare an 8-year-old to a 14-year-old to a 34-year-old, you just see a lot more emotion in the brain. Now, you didn't need me to tell you brain studies to show that. Just go to dinner where there's a bunch of adolescents at one table and then there's a bunch of adults at the other table. Here's the adult table. Yes. Oh, that's right. Oh, yes. And here's the adolescent table. Oh my God, I can't believe that's so incredible. Wow, they're having so much more fun. Because the emotional spark is passion. It's a more emotional brain. Now, part of that needs to be understood, and this was very helpful for me, that there is this intense emotion. Remember, it's appraisal too, and it's going to appraise these other feature of the limbic area, that neutral things actually can look hostile. Any adults know what I'm talking about? So like, I just read the paper at work. I came home. I had 2 adolescents at home. I said, hi, I'm home. They go, what do you mean? I go, I'm home. You're doing it again. It's that tone of your voice. Like this, I go, what? No, stop. So I just, okay, whatever. Now, for parents, I want to suggest to you, when you get the eye rolling and get the pushback on things, you need to realize that the emotional spark is there for a reason. And if you take them on and say, don't talk to me like that, young lady, you're going to start World War III unnecessarily. Because in about 60 seconds, it's going to go. But if you take them on, it's going to last for hours, won't it? And with my son one time, I took away his guitar case for the next 10 years or something like that. Nuts. Absolutely nuts. What we do as parents is what I mean. What we do as parents. Don't take them on. Give them space. Because emotional spark, why is it there? Emotion evokes motion. It revs up the body. It's passion for sure. The reason is to get out of the oatmeal house. Okay? Now, what's the downside of having a more emotional brain? It's tiring, it's unpredictable. What else? What's that? People get upset at you, you get upset at yourself, you're irritable, you're moody. Absolutely. So there's a downside to it, but what's the upside? Fun, passion. You know, it's great to be alive. Now, it's up and down because the sorrows are deeper, right? It's up and down. So, if we don't teach adolescents about the natural state of intense emotions, then they just withdraw from their own signals from down below. And it is possible to do what's called dissociate and just live up in your cortex. But then you lose the vitality of life. You can do your homework, you can aim for the grades, but you're feeling very little. This is not good. So what do we need to do? Instead of avoiding the surf, we need to teach kids how to surf their emotional life. Don't avoid the water. Don't get drowned in the waves. Teach them how to surf. But we basically don't do that at home, and we don't do that in school. Right? So that's number one. Emotional spark. You can teach skills of surfing emotions. They're completely teachable. The start is in the book. The gray pages teach you how to do that. They teach you to become aware of your heart, aware of your intestines, aware of your muscles, aware of your brainstem, aware of your limbic area, the source of emotion. And then once you're aware of that, you learn to regulate it. You learn to surf the waves. And my God, you see an adolescent who's self-possessed, who's learned to ride the surf of her own emotional waves. She's like a different person. Just read the Mindsight book story of Jonathan, a 16-year-old. He had so many wild emotions, people wanted to put him on all these medications. His parents refused. I taught him to do these mindset techniques, and he is filled with equilibrium, what's called equanimity. As Jonathan said when he learned this thing called the Wheel of Awareness, which you can do from my website, and that's what he did in the practice with me, he learned that even if an emotion was really intense, he didn't have to take it so personally. That's wisdom. And he just learned that from talking to me. But you can learn it from the book, is what people say. It's what that waitress told me about her 15-year-old son. But no one seems to talk to kids about it. We even teach 5-year-olds how to do that. It's teachable, this Wheel of Awareness practice. It integrates consciousness. I won't get into that here, but it's a teachable skill. So that's number one, ES, emotional spark. Number two, social engagement. If you're an adolescent gazelle and you don't have social engagement with your other adolescent gazelles, and you're out on the plains, what is going to happen to you? You're somebody's lunch. You have, well, probably about 100 million years of evolution in you as an adolescent that tells you if you don't belong to an adolescent group or another single adolescent, you're going to die. Literally, it's survival, life and death, to belong. Okay? That is hugely important for us to know as parents and for adolescents to know themselves. Why? Because when your adolescent comes to you and my daughter says, I got to buy these shoes, because everyone else is wearing these shoes. I said, those are $300 shoes. I'm not going to buy. But if I just said, oh, shut up, that's so stupid. You're caving into peer pressure. That's not attuning to her. I can say, I understand you really want to buy those shoes. They're $300. That's a lot of money. And I wonder, if you're feeling like you really want to make sure that people accept you as you are. And that's understandable. I understand you want those connections with people. And amazingly, when you identify the internal feelings and the meanings of things as a parent, everything begins to settle down. Why? Because you're seeing what's actually going on in your adolescent. Right? Belonging is hugely important, even if it's with one friend. Now, that's the reason for the social engagement. What's the downside of social engagement besides spending $300 on a pair of shoes? What's the downside? What's that? Caving into peer pressure. You give up morality to gain membership. Exactly. Seriously. I need to belong to them, so I'm going to do all this crap and I'm going to bully some kid at school because everybody else is doing that or something like that. You give up morality to gain membership. Now, we can understand the drive for membership, life and death and all that stuff. However, we need to give our adolescents, and that's our responsibility as adults, what you can call an internal compass. Part of it is surfing the emotional waves, so that it's the issue number one of emotional spark. The second thing is the internal compass says, you know something? I know I'm an adolescent. I know I have these remodeling my brain. I know I have a drive to belong. But those people bullying that kid is not right. My gut is telling me it's wrong. My heart tells me this is really sad what they're doing. And I will find other friends whose values I agree on. That's an internal compass. We actually know the neural circuitry of that internal compass. It has to do in part with this prefrontal region, and we know how to develop it. Developing self-awareness, self-possession, equanimity that gives a kid an internal compass. And kids who don't develop this, they're absolutely prone to peer pressure. Why? Because it's a drive of the limbic area beneath the cortex where awareness is. It's a drive of this limbic area to have them belong so they don't die. But they're not even thinking about that. They're just doing it. They're just bullying that kid, or wearing those clothes, or getting drunk at parties, or having sex because they don't want to have sex, but everybody else is having sex, or whatever the thing is, to just belong. Or it's like what one patient of mine once said. You know, he came in, I don't think people are doing it these days, but there was a day, not so long ago, when boys wore their pants beneath their butt. Remember that? So he walked in, the belt was beneath his butt, his underwear is like hanging out, and he walks in. I thought, this is great, because my kids passed through that age, and they never did that, but he was doing that. So I thought, this is a great opportunity. In as kind and compassionate a way, I said, why do you do that? But I didn't say it like that. I said, tell me, like, what goes on inside of you to wear your pants beneath your butt. But he was such a sweet guy. I love all my patients, but I love him. And he looks at me, he goes, I'm not going to get the phrase just right. I said it in the book, but it goes like this. He goes, I'm trying to be just like everybody else who's trying not to be like anybody else. And I looked at him, I said, exactly. It was so awesome, you know? It was epic. Okay, so, all right, so the downside is to give morality. What's the upside of social engagement? You're not lonely, that's good. You feel good for the moment because you have connections. What else is a long-term positive thing also? Communication skills. If I tell you that if you looked at the scientific research on how happy you are, meaning eudaimonic happiness, a sense of purpose, connection, and equanimity, that kind of happiness. Happiness studies, number one. How long you live, longevity studies. Medical health, how healthy your body is. And mental health, how healthy your mind is. Those 4 studies, happiness, eudaimonia happiness, connection, meaning equanimity, longevity, how long you live, mental health and medical health. And I told you there's one factor that's like the most robust factor shared by all 4 studies. What would it be? Social connection, social relationships. You learn them in a big way in adolescence. Adolescents are built to be collaborative. They're built to find connections with each other. That's the upside. It's a lifelong source of resilience. How you learn to build social networks of support. So that's a great upside. That's SE. Now we have N and CE. N is novelty, novelty seeking. And nature needs novelty to be sought to get out of the oatmeal house. Right? The open house is comfortable, familiar, warm. Oh, the parents are so great. It's not like the parents changed. I remember when our two kids went through their adolescence, it was like, I can't wait for him to be out of this house. You know what I'm talking about. And same thing with her. It was like, so sad, but so happy. You know, that they were... And nature is brilliant. My God, I wouldn't have let either of them go if they were like they were when they were 8-year-olds like that. Oh my God. Can I take you home with me? Anyway, you know, I remember that. Now they're in their 20s. It's like a magical time. But, you know, adolescence is tough. Okay, so that's the novelty seeking. How does nature do that? Well, nature does it in two ways we didn't understand before. One is, there's a circuit, take your hand model of the brain. There's a circuit between the cortex, the limbic area, and the brainstem. So because it goes up and down, we call it a vertically distributed set of circuits, really. It's a set of circuits. But we simply call it the reward circuitry. The neurotransmitter, the chemical that allows the neurons of the reward circuitry to communicate with each other, is called dopamine. And anything in science is controversial, but one leading view is this. Nature drops the baseline dopamine levels, compared to an 8-year-old to a 14-year-old, drops the baseline levels and increases the release levels. Novelty, new stuff, is one of the main things that secretes dopamine. So what that means is, when your baseline dopamine is lower, it means you feel restless and bored and irritated with the same old, like your parents. You know what I'm talking about? And as parents, we've got to not take that personally, those eye rolls and the dismissing thing. And finally, I felt like I was back in medical school, where in surgery, you know, when the surgeon says, you know, cut the suture, you always learn to say, do you want it too short or too long? Because you knew you'd never get it right. So I would remind myself this with our kids. You know, they would say something, I'd say, no matter what I say, it's going to be a problem, right? It's left, it should be right, right should be left, I mean, whatever. So, but you need to realize they're kind of pushing away that way. But the novelty seeking is driven by this dopamine, so it's not just with the familiar. Okay, what is the downside of having novelty drive? And by the way, it's not just the dopamine change. It is something called hyper-rational thinking, another limbic change, where basically the evaluative circuits say, I'm mostly going to pay attention to the exciting parts of a choice and not to the dangerous parts of a choice. Does that sound familiar? So, like if you're going to drive a car 100 miles an hour, unfortunately, your hyper-rational thinking go like this. You know, if I drive this car 100 miles an hour, there's probably a, 65% chance I'll probably make it through fine, which means there's only a 35% chance that something terrible will happen. But if someone were to ask me, you know, what's the most likely outcome? Well, the most likely outcome is that 65% is greater than 35%. It'll be fine, which is mathematically correct. And then I just don't care about the downside. And I drive the car 100 miles an hour, and I kill this wonderful teacher. So, hyper-rational thinking combined with the dopamine issue of the reward circuitry is what we believe drives novelty seeking. Now, what novelty seeking is really all about is courage. Just like emotional spark is passion, and social engagement is connection and collaboration, novelty seeking is courage. But what's the downside of this courage? Risk-taking, and I don't want to scare you, especially you, I don't want to scare you, but adolescents are 2 to 3 times as likely to have permanent damage or lethal effects on their body due to things that they themselves did than at any other time of life, childhood or adulthood. It is the healthiest time of life and the most dangerous time of life. So adolescence, when your parents get freaked out about you making certain decisions about driving after you've had drinks or something like that, which, why are you drinking anyway? But or going to parties where there are no adults, they are not overly reacting. That's based on the science. It's like one of my patients came in one day, he looked absolutely terrified. I said, what are you terrified of? He goes, you know, I went to a party this weekend, and my parents insist I come home at midnight. But my friends who I drove with, they're going to stay till 2 or 3 in the morning. I said, so what'd you do? He goes, well, I was scared of my parents, and I didn't really want to not get the things I would get if I didn't show up, so I decided to take a cab. They told me to take a cab, I took a cab. Okay, fine. Took a cab. And then what happened? Well, my friends drove home at 2 in the morning, and they crashed into a tree, and 2 of them were killed. And one of them was killed was sitting in the seat I would have been sitting in. And, this is the idea. Those kids were drinking, and they were driving, and the problem with that is not only you have this adolescent brain thing with the hyper-rational thinking, the dopamine drive, but once you drink, any kind of semblance of reasonable thinking you have from the alcohol is gone. So it's I don't know if you know this, but we in California have deeper concerns than our New York colleagues, whose kids don't drive cars. And when they get drunk, they just fall down on the street. They don't crash into trees. Now, I'm serious about that. I've talked to them about that. They go, well, you guys have to drive cars in California. It's true. So, we need to think about that. Anyway, so it is a risky time. What's the upside of novelty seeking? Courage, and you can go for it, you can try new ideas, you can do all sorts of things. It's a fabulous, fabulous aspect of adolescence to have that courage. Okay, the last one is CE, creative exploration. Creative exploration basically means the adolescent mind, which is being shaped in part by the brain and shaped in part by culture and relationships, is pushing against the status quo. So I used to run a research program at UCLA called the Center for Culture, Brain, and Development. We were always studying how things might be universal, and in adolescence, what I can tell you is it is universal to have adolescents push against the status quo. You could be at a small village in South America, and what they're doing is the adults weave from the bottom to the top. So the adolescents are going to weave from the top to the bottom. And that's a big deal. Like, how would you do that? That kind of thing. So creative explorations are basically there so that you can say, as the kid in the oatmeal house, this is the way this house is set up. And I've learned about this house in my childhood when I was 8 and a little older. But now I can imagine a house that I might want to make on my own. So if novelty seeking is courage, and social engagement is connection and collaboration, and emotional spark is passion, creative exploration is imagination, right? And what it does is it allows you to imagine another life you could have. So it allows you to get out of the oatmeal house. What's the downside of creative exploration? Is there a downside to it?
Drug overdose.
Well, drug overdose is good you're mentioning that. That would be from the dopamine thing, that alcohol, cigarettes, heroin, cocaine, all are driven, we think, by this dopamine issue. And it's a very, very serious problem. And that's why we think kids have the drug issue for the novelty seeking. But what's the downside of having creative exploration and pushing against the status quo? Yeah?
You can be kind of offensive to you.
Okay, so you can offend other people because you're like a rebel without a cause, and especially parents who are very reactive to you could try to squash you, or schools that say that the only thing that matters is grade point average and SATs and standardized tests. That might not be too swift for a person who's got a creative imagination, but you would irritate other people. What about internal experience? You might have unrealistic expectations, and, well, that's interesting. Unrealistic expectations. That's a really interesting one. What do you mean by that? Oh, I see. So you might just imagine yourself into a castle in Germany with servants and stuff like that. That does remind me of once a dear friend of mine, her son was once in kindergarten, and she was called into the school. They said, your son, we think he's psychotic. And she said, oh my God. She ran to the school. They said, what's going on? She says, the teacher says to my friend, your son is saying he lives in a castle and has servants. And my friend goes, he does. And I went to visit her. She does live in a castle. It was on sale, and they actually bought it. It wasn't Germany, it was France. But the point is that, she had big dreams, and she got the castle that she always wanted, and it was, like, on sale, so that's okay. So I would be very careful to say to an adolescent, you have unrealistic expectations, because we would never have Microsoft or Facebook or any of the amazing things that happen in art, music, technology, and science. Most of, if not all of Einstein's ideas he came up with before he was 26. The major contributions for all those fields comes from the adolescent mind. And so, just to stay with the downside for a moment, for me the downside was I got very sad. I thought my parents were gods. I thought the world was fine. And I was wrong on both counts. You know what I'm talking about? And now more than ever before. Right? So, it's really painful to be an adolescent who came from a childhood where you just say, oh, this is great, I'm learning. And then the creative exploration says, let me see the way things could be. Whoa, things the way they are not so good. I think I'll create this new thing, whether it's music, art, technology, or science. So it's got an upside, which is these incredible contributions, but it has a downside, this thing. Now, I just want to say one thing about creative exploration. If you take a step back and look at our whole human family, and this is just a suggestion I'm having you think about. In many ways, the reason we've adapted all over this planet, now it's for good and for bad, but the reason we are incredibly adaptive, I'm going to have you consider, is because of adolescence. Adolescents are our prime resource in adapting to the world. So let's just do a little survey. When we become adults, we've gotten a niche that we've learned to work in, whether we're going to stay at home and have a family, or we're going to be working and staying at home, we're going to be out and working. But let's be honest as adults. When you come home after a whole day of doing whatever you're doing, when you're at home, how do you feel? Tired. Okay, I don't want to disillusion the kids or the adolescents. You're tired. The last thing you want to do is figure out how to adapt to an ever-changing world, right? You are exhausted. All you want to do is watch some TV and go to sleep. Or, other things you might do, but you want to just relax. Okay, now, the world is forever changing. We evolved, we adapted, we developed, we grew, we adults grew in a world that doesn't even exist barely anymore. The future is about adolescence. It's about their essence. So let's say one thing so I don't forget it. If you look at every research study on our brains as adults, and this were a talk, let's say, on adult well-being, happiness, sense of medical health, mental health, all the things we talked about. And we looked at a set of studies called neuroplasticity studies. That is, how does our brain as adults continue to grow and stay strong, stay integrated throughout the lifespan? Well, you can look at the factors that are good for that. Sleeping well, exercising, all that kind of stuff. But there's also 4 features that I will tell you as adults you need to keep alive in your life if you want to keep your brain strong, integrated, and growing well throughout the lifespan. Can you guess which ones they are? Keep passion in your life with an emotional spark. Keep friends close to you with social engagement. Do new stuff. Have the courage to do new stuff, novelty. And challenge the status quo. Challenge your mind. The essence of adolescence is the essence of a healthy adulthood. Now, I was teaching this once at a school, and one of the adolescents said, "Oh my God, I think I figured something out." So I said, "What is it? What is it?" He goes, "I think I figured out why they hate us." I said, "Say more." And he goes, "They've lost their essence, and we've got it, and they're jealous." Isn't that beautiful? From an adolescent's mind. So, here's what I want to leave you with, and then we'll open up for questions. The future is all about how we, as a human family, can embrace the essence of adolescence. Our entire future on this planet I don't want to get too heavy here, but it's about serving others. Having the grit to serve it. If you look at Angela Duckworth's beautiful book, Grit, if I had to summarize the key points for what we're talking about, what she has studied is, number one, building on Carol Dweck's work here at Stanford, on a growth mindset. Realize that instead of a fixed mindset where you say, hey, my GPA or my SAT score is a reflection of some innate quality in me, and if it's not high enough, it means I'm defective. That's like a shame view. Instead, you go, oh, life is always full of challenge and effort and growth. That's the growth mindset. That's what we need. Too many people, adults, kids, and adolescents, have a fixed mindset. And they take challenges as a threat to their sense of who they are. And parents, I gotta say, evoke this. You say to little Johnny, oh, you're so smart, you're so smart, you're so smart. Oh, you're so smart. Instead of, wow, you put in a lot of effort. I really love the way you put energy into making that painting. You know, what do we say? Oh, that painting could be in a museum. You're like Picasso. Oh, my God. Quick, put it on your resume. You know, or something like this. I'm serious. So, praising effort, not outcome, is crucial. It's about the journey, not about the destination. That's what the growth mindset is. It's about the journey to learn and be lifelong learners. Hold on to your curiosity. Love learning. You get about 100 years in this body. Make the most of it. Why should you be saddled down? Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you. Let's hear it for our 8-year-old. We're ready for you. We're going to change the schools and the culture by the time you get to be an adolescent. You'll see. We're going to do it. Don't worry. Thanks. So, we owe it to him. We really do. So, it's about the journey, not about the destination, but we're so focused on the destination. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So, the second thing is in Carol Dweck's work. Then Angela Duckworth, she wrote a beautiful book called Grit. And in that book, here's what she says. Every individual has a certain proclivity, a tendency of their brain, really, to like certain things. One of our kids likes paint, another likes music. One likes science, the other likes reading literature. Okay, whatever. You have a proclivity. That proclivity sometimes gives you pleasure. When you combine a proclivity with pleasure, let's just call it, as Angela Duckworth does, call it passion. We need to support adolescents finding their passion because as the pruning is happening, the brain is becoming specialized as it prunes down the things it wants to hold on to and lets go of the thing it doesn't. So for our son, for example, he had a proclivity to music. He got a lot of pleasure out of it. It was his passion. He would play 6-7 hours a day, wouldn't do much homework. And we said to him, we said, look, you have responsibility for your homework, but we really support you in what your passion is. When you combine that, Angela Duckworth has found in her research, with purpose. What is purpose? Purpose is being service to others, being in service of others' well-being. So in our son's case, he would play music with other people and they would give them incredible joy. Right? Being of service to others, letting people illuminate things. Or our daughter went into environmental science. She's in service of the well-being of others in the well-being of our planet. Having purpose combined with your passion, she loves nature like crazy, and so she takes her proclivity and her pleasure, that's her passion, she combines it with the purpose, then she will have grit. Notice all of that is about the journey, about the feeling of what your proclivity is, what you get pleasure out of, where your passion is. Realize that you can't do everything. There's no reason to have to do everything. Be great at everything. All that kind of stuff that you hear about for college applications. It's absurd. It's unnatural. So, what can we do to support our adolescents? Here's just a couple simple things that are huge. Number one, I'm now speaking to the adults in the room who are parents and teachers. Look, I have 2 kids who are now in their 20s. They're out in the world. And I'm just going to just say how it felt for me. You can think about how it feels for you, because I can't tell you what your feelings are. But for me, when I became a dad, the huge feeling came up in me that the number one thing in my life was protect, our son's older, was protect that boy. And when our daughter was born, it was to protect both of them. Protect her, protect him. And when they fought with each other, that became very complicated. As you know, if you've read the Crepes of Wrath story in the Mindset book, oh my God, is that complicated. Anyway, but that's another story, sibling rivalry. But the idea is to protect them, to keep them safe. Okay. Now, when they're in preschool in the oatmeal house, it's relatively straightforward to do. Not in every neighborhood, not in every world, but you can do that. There are things, obviously, that get in the way, domestic violence, someone with an alcohol problem, all sorts of things. But in general, you want to protect your kids, and it's more straightforward when they're preschool. Then they get in elementary school, and kids can actually be pretty nasty to each other. And bullying happens, and you feel so vulnerable. How do you protect your kid from bullying? I still take care of a kid who's now in his 30s, and I took care of him when he was younger. He was bullied like crazy. No one stopped it at the school when he was like in 2nd grade. Still has issues about the bullying. It's a form of abuse. Anyway, so they get exposed. You just feel so, but they come home and you give them massage, you read them the story, you do all the stuff you can do. Then they go to middle school, and their adolescence is starting to push away from you. I remember when my son became an adolescent. First time I knew, I said, hey, there's a cool movie out. He goes, oh yeah, that's really cool. I said, you want to go? He goes, not with you. Oh, I felt so badly, I was like, what? Not with me? He goes, yeah, not with you. I mean, it's just like, God, that was actually right before the crepes problem, actually. Now that I think about it, I should think about that a little more. All right, so then they go to high school. And I remember this feeling. Now, I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, so, I saw a lot of people going through this ahead of before our kids were there, so I could think it through. But here's the issue. You look at the world today, and you know there are more unemployed people below 35 on this planet than ever before, and it freaks you out. And even if you don't want your kid to have a castle in Germany and servants and all that stuff, but you just want them to have a job, seriously, you go, oh my God. Now, we have a weird issue, especially here in Silicon Valley, but we have it in Silicon Beach down there, where you get this illusion, maybe they'll start Snapchat, or maybe they'll start Facebook, or something like that. And if you don't, you'll feel inadequate as a parent, and the kid picks that up and feels, oh my God, I'm inadequate. They have the shame state of inadequacy. It's really serious, actually. But, put that aside, you want them to at least get a job. So how can you try to do something to deal with your anxiety that you want to protect this kid who's about to launch out when they're 18, they're out of the house? My God, is it nerve-wracking, right? You know what I'm talking about. Oh my God. What am I going to lock onto? Well, I'm going to lock onto something that has some kind of solidity to it, like a number, a GPA. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Get a big GPA. Get a the biggest one. Like that, right? Because you're trying to deal with your anxiety because you love your child. Of course you love your child. You just want them to get a job or start Facebook or something. But you want them to get to the destination you have in your mind to reduce your anxiety. So if something happens to you, they'll be okay. Listen, let's take a deep breath. Literally. And let's actually give ourselves an applause for actually taking care of our children. Let's give each other applause. Now, in that beautiful drive to take care of our children, we have anxiety inside of us, and there's something called mirror neurons, and our kids are going to mirror. They're going to soak in like a sponge. They really should call it sponge neurons. They sponge in our feelings. They feel our anxiety. And we lock onto a number, and we lock onto a destination instead of the process of curiosity and love of life, We lock onto a number like a GPA, an SAT score, or the lowest acceptance percentage for an elite college. Because those are symbols, false ones, but symbols of certainty. They're an illusion of certainty. So we can understand how in many schools of this caliber, and my kids went to them too, that as parents, we try to calm our anxiety down, our fears, our beautiful love of our children, our drive to keep them safe and have them get to the destination of a secure life by holding on to a destination that they will get to through these numbers, GPA, SAT score, all the resume stuff, the elite school, totally understandable. But if we do a science check, that's our certainty drive. If we do a science check, here's what we find. Where you go to college has no impact on you being successful financially, you being successful in terms of contributing to society, or you being happy. None. So hold on. We put our kids through this thing where we get a destination in our mind that they should get a certain GPA and a certain SAT score so they get into that certain low acceptance rate elite school, so when we go to a party, we can say, my child's at blah, blah, blah. Not that you're trying to boast, but it's and it guarantees nothing. It's a psychotic delusion. Now, why do I say psychotic? Because it's not consistent with the scientific reality. Now, here's the thing to think about. What's the downside of doing that? The downside, let's list them together. Number one, your child is going to feel incredibly stressed. You, who they love like crazy, believe it or not, they do, have taught them, whether it's explicitly with what you say or implicitly by how you behave, that the destination is what matters. And they start living with a fixed mindset that it's all about where you get to. That shows some quality in yourself. Well, all of that is a prison that you have unintentionally created. Then they enter a school like this, or the schools my kids went to. And the culture of the children, now adolescents, creates the same set of meanings that the parents have imparted in this common community that they have. And you hear it in the media. And then the teachers, who may not even believe all that stuff, they feel it too. And the principal says, well, I got to do this. I got to have this kind of grade point average, that kind of grade point average, oh, like that. And no one is actually taking a step back in any systematic way and saying, this is insane. And here's what it does. It gets kids, number one, to be focusing on destinations rather than the process of the journey, and that does not equip them for life. Number two, it gives them zero mindsight skills, which you could learn in the Brainstorm book. You say, how do I learn those? The gray pages of the Brainstorm book will teach you how to do that, which basically creates inside of them an internal compass, which is about the growth mindset. It's about knowing their own proclivities and pleasures and passions. It's about realizing that life is about being of service to others, not just about me. That's number two. You don't develop those skills. Number three, you don't develop the capacity for being self-aware to the point where you say, you know something, I'm not going to go with those people who are going in that direction. I'm going to be guided by my sense of morality and purpose. Number four, if you look at those 9 middle prefrontal functions that we talked about, you've done very little to help your adolescent develop them. So as you launch them at 18 in the fancy college you got them into, they are not prepared for life. And believe me, I have many of those people as my patients. And they weren't given a resilient mind, they were given a fancy resume. And they come to believe that's all there is to life. And you know how that feels when they start becoming aware of it? Empty. Meaningless. And you ask questions like, why do people jump in front of trains? Or why do they do other things, like become addicted to things? Because life is meaningless. Everything, all of their life was carved by their parents, by their friends, by their teachers, by the school environment, by the community, was about this destination that's an illusion. I don't know how you feel right now. I was just talking about this, but it's really sad. Because the fact is, and if you just look at Finland as an example, where they have basically no homework, and what the kids do in those schools, the top-rated school in the world, those schools, and what they do is those kids help each other. So let's just take a brief moment and review, what have you been doing as parents, or you as teachers, or you as administrators, to support the essence of adolescence? And we'll talk about school now, just in broad strokes, not gun or pally, but just in general, what do schools do? How do schools take an adolescent who's come from childhood and enters middle school and then goes into high school and supported their emotional spark? The schools I know about shove it down or call it funny names like you're nuts or you're crazy. They don't do anything to nurture that and let it find its energy somewhere. Emotional spark. In the schools I'm familiar with, I don't know the schools here, but the major thing is competition instead of collaboration. Where you look to the left, you look to the right, one of you is going to get into Brown or Stanford or Harvard or something like that, and the others are not. And so you better do better than them. It's the opposite of candlelight. Just picture a candle. Let's say I'm a candle with my wick lit. And here next to me on the right is a candle without light, candle to left without light, right? So I lean over and I share my flame with the candle to my right. And I lean back straight, and now that candle's lit up. And I lean to the left and I light up this candle, and now the three of us are lit. What did that take away from my flame? I'm asking you. Nothing. What did it do to the world? It made it brighter. Exactly. We do the opposite. We say, someone's got a better light than you, that's a better resume. They're only going to take one of you to that school from this school. I've been through this stuff. It is the saddest thing in the world. Adolescents are built for social engagement, to collaborate. All we do is teach them to compete with each other. If we want to get competition down, here's the way to set up competition. You lay out the 10 worst problems on the planet, and there's probably a lot more, but let's pick 10 of the biggest ones. You know what they are. Poverty, famine, climate change issues, violence, on and on. You say to a kid, get in touch. You say, hey, you are a 7th grader, 8th grader. You're no longer a child. I am your consultant, not your teacher. What I'm going to do is have you get in touch with your gut feeling. That's your internal compass, your heart. And just figure out which of these 10 problems really speaks to you right now. I think I want to deal with famine. I don't know why. Good. Go with your feeling. And then let's see other people in this classroom are going to have that same feeling. Yeah, let's work on famine. Okay, we're going to work on famine. Okay, I'm your consultant as your teacher. Let's find ways of looking at the knowledge we have and people you could turn to. And then when you beat this competition, everybody benefits. That's the kind of world we could create. Instead of get the best SAT score, get the best GPA, beat out the people next to you. It's really sick, if you think about it. And it's the world in which our adolescents are living. Seriously. So social engagement. Okay. Number 3, novelty. What do we do to support adolescents doing things in a new way? We just basically make the classroom a sophisticated 5th grade classroom. More and more. They sit there, they sit down, doing all this stuff. You could have so many problem-based learning approaches that are done in a novel kind of way where they have the courage to try to do things in new ways. It's the courage piece. And we just don't do that. We could, but we don't. And then finally, creative exploration. When adolescents push against the status quo, we just crush them. We just crush them. And they're just trying to do the best they can. Right? Our future on this planet depends on the essence of adolescence, not just being tolerated, but actually being nurtured. These adolescents are our future as a human family. And, I say at the end of the Brainstorm book, what I'll end this talk with tonight. We have unintentionally, probably for 2,500 years, and I talk a lot about this in my new book, Mind, we have unintentionally basically taken what Hippocrates said 2,500 years ago, which is that the mind is only coming from the brain. And then William James, a physician who was the grandfather of modern psychology, affirmed this in 1890 with his principles of psychology, saying the mind is just brain activity. We know that. Now, if you realize that the self comes from the mind, and you believe what these physicians have said, my field, medicine, that the mind is the synonym for the brain, well then, where is your self? Your self is up in your head, or at best it's encased by your skin. I think that is this hidden belief that we've all been taught by our parents, by our schools, by science, and by society, in modern society. So an integrated self would be, yes, I have a me, I need to get good sleep. Sleep is really important. It's the time that glial cells clean up all the toxins that are released when you're awake. Adolescents are not getting enough sleep, and it's hurting them. They are literally poisoning their brains because we're giving them too much homework. And I'm not using the word poisoning like accidentally or metaphorically. The poisons that are released are not getting time to be cleaned up. They need about 8 to 10 hours of sleep every night. I used to tell my kids when they said, my homework done, I said, I don't care. Go to sleep. Why would we care? It just literally is destructive to their bodies. And you need to really look deeply at the research on homework, which says after 1 or 2 hours, it actually doesn't do anyone any good. So we need to really look at that. Seriously. Just look at the science. I'm not making this stuff up. Just look at a book that'll come out in January called At What Cost? By David Gleason. I'm just reading it now to write a blurb for it. It's a beautiful book because it gives you the summary of the science. Okay, so, the sleep is really important. So you have a me that has a body. You want to have exercise for the body. You want to have the body hang out. You want to feed the body well. Enjoy the body. That's great. That's really great. But you also have a self that is a we. You're connected to other people. We need more face-to-face time. You're having conversations with other people. You're being of service to other people. That's where eudaimonia is emerging, this happiness that's about connection, about meaning, and about equanimity. Eudaimonia is a Greek term for that kind of happiness. We know how to get it, and it comes in connection. It's what wisdom is all about. So what would an integrated identity be? Integration is differentiation, linkage. You have a me identity, and you have a we identity. Well, the way we can put those together is as a mwe. M-W-E. Mwe is literally a way you can realize that's who you are. Yes, you have the body for about 100 years, but your connection to other people and the planet is a part of who you are too. It's a part of yourself. And instead of treating this planet like a trash can, we can actually treat it like an extension of our body. It's a part of ourself. So when Integration happens in the brain, and when we can allow mindsight to be taught in schools and at home to adolescents, and they can develop those 9 functions of an integrated brain, do you know what the outcome of integration is? It's kindness and compassion. If you want to graduate a 12th grader who's ready for the world with a resilient mind, with kindness and compassion, we actually know how to do this. You know, Margaret Mead said, don't ever think that a small group of people, like all of us in this room right here now, cannot make a change, a huge change in cultural evolution. Because you know something? It's the only thing that ever has, she said. So if you want to make a difference, when you go home tonight with your adolescents, you hug your adolescent, you see your adolescent, and just start thinking about journeys, maintaining a love of learning, a love of connection to other people, a kindness and compassion that comes from leading this integrated life. You can do this starting tonight. And there are steps if you want to develop this internal reflective capacity called mindful awareness. I teach them in the book, the Brainstorm book. You can use it. There's going to be book clubs here. You can get involved in that. This is not just here's one lecture we heard. This is actually a shift, not just in the way you may be with your kids, but you start doing that with your adolescents. Your adolescents will feel your support as parents. The principal of these schools, the teacher of these schools, they can't do it alone. It's got to start with you. Your adolescents will feel it in you. When you look at them and you realize you don't want to drive them into stress. You don't want to drive them to feel like they are inadequate. You don't want to drive them to feel shame that there's something wrong with them because they didn't get in here or get in there. It's the journey. Loving the journey, loving oneself, loving others, feeling compassion for oneself, compassion for others, really contributing to the world in these positive ways. We are candles, not competition machines. And bringing light to other people is what we can do. And together, we can make this a kinder, more compassionate, more resilient world. For now, and for generations to come. Thank you very much.